Crystal here from Homemaking on the Homestead, and today I'm going to do part 2 in my homemaking series of important homemaking skills. Those skills that I think every homemaker should have, and the skills that I think are really can be lacking today, as homemaking isn't what it used to be. It used to be much more prominent. I did a video on Is Homemaking a Lost Art, so you might want to see that. I'll post it up here. And today's video is going to be on cooking from scratch. I think today many young women are not taught how to cook from scratch, and it's so easy to be able to just go to the grocery store and there's all kinds of quick to fix, bring home and eat type foods. There's fast foods, restaurants, delivery nowadays, and so the need to learn to cook from scratch isn't what it used to be. Basically, when I was growing up, my mother cooked everything from scratch. I grew up in the 70s, and there really wasn't the variety of convenience foods and quick foods that there are today. My mom cooked basic foods and cooked everything from scratch. I shared this in the last video, so I'm not going to go into the full detail, but when I left home, even though my mother knew how to cook, it was not something that she had taught me. I did not know how to cook. I would spend a great deal of time in a cookbook that she had actually given me. It was an old cookbook. It was old back then, and I still have it today, which I'll share that with you in just a minute. But I would spend way too much time trying to figure out what to make. I quickly learned I needed to learn how to cook more forward thinking, make menus, plan out what we're going to eat. I had a budget. We had very little money when we started, and so I had to really be careful what I spent. And I quickly learned that foods such as a box of hamburger helper really wasn't a good deal. It might have been quick and easy, but it definitely was not a good deal. I could buy a bag of pasta, hamburger, and seasonings and feed the two of us for a couple days or even a little bit more rather than just the one meal out of that one box, and I saved quite a bit of money doing that. So cooking from scratch is a very frugal thing to do. Later on, when my husband was in college and I had to live with an even smaller budget, I really started learning how to cook from just basic ingredients. I found this kind of a 1960s throwback type grocery store in the city where I lived, and you went in there, it had kind of a hippie vibe feel, but it had all these barrels of food and you could just measure out what you wanted. I didn't even know what a lot of these things were, but I would buy little bits of things and come home and see if I could figure out how to cook those. My father at the time gave me a cookbook called Diet for a Small Planet. Francis Lappe or Lap or something, I can't remember exactly. I can post it below. And it was a vegetarian cookbook. While we're not vegetarians, the one thing that it did teach me is the protein value of things like beans and brown rice and whole grains, and how to combine foods together to get the maximum benefit nutritionally wise. So that really got me started thinking on not only the most frugal use of my money to feed us, but also the healthiest way to feed us. And quite honestly, cooking from scratch will still give you that today. It'll still give you the most frugal way to cook, and it will give you way more health value because you have control over what goes into it. I would get to the point when I was raising my children that I started looking at meat more like a flavoring. As long as I had a lot of nutrition-packed food in my meal, in my casserole, whether that was a pot of chili, that I really didn't need as much meat as what a recipe would say. So I was able to have a lot of control over what we ate. I wanted in this video to share with you a couple cookbooks, somewhat for nostalgia and fun, because these cookbooks go way back in my history. This old cookbook, and I'm telling you, it's very old and very worn, very well used. The Better Homes and Gardens New Cookbook. This, I believe, was the 1976 edition of this cookbook. My mother gave me this cookbook when I moved out on my own. This cookbook taught me so much. Now I know we live in a day and age where you can get all kinds of information on YouTube and blogs and recipe sites. You can learn how to cook anything. So cookbooks aren't necessarily as high priority nowadays, but back in the early 80s when I started out, it was most definitely a high priority because there was no internet, there were no other options if you didn't have a good cookbook. And sometimes it is nice to just be able to sit down and hold a book and open it up and peruse it at your leisure and not always be doing it on the computer. But this book taught me how to roast a chicken, how different cuts of meat, how to make a pie crust, how to make meringue. So one of my inexpensive, budget-friendly desserts, and I made it a lot back when, especially when my husband was in school, and we were definitely on a limited budget at that point, was lemon meringue pie, because I literally could buy a couple lemons in the grocery store for pennies, and then beyond that, the basic thing that I needed was eggs, flour, salt, and at that time I used shortening. I don't use shortening anymore, but at that time I did, and all of those things were super cheap. And I learned with this cookbook, I learned how to make a lemon meringue pie, and it became a staple dessert back in those days. This cookbook also taught me how to bake bread, just a basic, simple loaf of white bread. And that saved me so much. I had 2 little children at that point, and like I said, a limited budget, and just knowing how to bake bread was an amazing skill. It's life-changing, really, when you know that you have that control to be able to have that as part of your menu, meals, food in your house at any time. And you have basically the same ingredients on your shelf, those pantry items like flour, salt, sugar, and with those things, and of course you need yeast for bread, but with those basic things you can create so many different foods that knowing how to cook from scratch is an incredible skill to have. Oftentimes some of the best things that can help a person along the way is a really good cookbook that just gets down to the basics. There's so much that you can do with that. If you learn how to make gravy, make a roux of flour and butter and some sort of liquid, you can put broth in it and you've got gravy. You can put cream, milk in it, and you have a white sauce. You can add cheese to that, now you have a cheese sauce. You can make it a little thicker, and now you have a substitute for cream of mushroom soup. So with those basic pantry items and some knowledge and skill, you really can cook just about whatever you want. I am not saying that this is the cookbook because, like I said, this is from 1976. But what I am saying is that, and I will leave a link to that, I think there's a newer, updated version of this one. But what I am saying is that a good basic cookbook is never a bad thing to have on the shelf, especially if you're new to cooking from scratch. All right, I would like to share this cookbook with you too, and this is definitely for nostalgia reasons. This was my mother's cookbook. My mother passed away probably 22 years ago, I think, maybe 23 years ago. And I was fortunate enough to be able to find her cookbook and her belongings, and I treasure this so much because I remember her pulling this cookbook out so much when I was a child. I believe that this is the 1960. The first edition came out in like 1954, and I believe this is probably like the 1962 edition. And so not only are cookbooks enjoyable to have and to learn from, but if you have a treasured and loved cookbook, it might be something that gets to be passed down to your own children. She has recipes written. She used it so much that I have pages that are falling out. I'm very careful when I use this cookbook because I don't want anything to get more damaged. Recipes she cut out from the newspaper and saved, and more recipes written down on the back. It's just kind of it's a fun keepsake. So I really value cookbooks nowadays. For many reasons. The one last is if you're learning to cook or if you're trying to expand on your basic skills, and I have this cookbook which I've really enjoyed over the years, and I'm pretty sure everybody's seen it. I got the big edition. You can buy smaller cookbooks, and I think they combined everything in the smaller cookbooks and put it into this one big fix it and forget it crock pot cookbook. So if you have a busy life and you still want to cook from scratch, your crock pot can oftentimes be your best friend. So I do recommend this one. The other cookbook that I used a lot when I was learning how to cook is The Joy of Cooking. Somewhere, I know I still have that book. I looked in my storage. I looked through a few totes that I have packed books away in, and I couldn't find it. But I know that was one that I would probably not get rid of, and so I can link that one below too, because it's a good basic cookbook. Also, Betty Crocker puts out a cookbook on everything you need to know to get started in cooking from scratch. I personally haven't looked at it, but what I have seen of it, it looks like a really good basic cookbook that I would not hesitate myself to buy. So I'll leave a link and you can look at it and see what you think if you're interested in cookbooks. I think in knowing how to cook from scratch as a valuable homemaking skill does not mean that that everything has to be done from scratch. There are still many convenience type foods out there that actually have value. I like salad in a bag. I mean, sometimes life is busy and it's an easy option, and I will do that. I have more convenience foods nowadays in my life, but just because of my circumstances are different than when I was raising my 8 kids. So it's nice to have on hand things, but I'm selective. Even then, I'm selective as to what I buy. And of course, basic things like canned tomatoes, canned tuna, canned beans, pasta, rice. Those are all good things to have on your shelf, because those can be used to create all kinds of different meals. I think having home-cooked meals on the table for dinner is a homemaking skill that just adds a huge warmth to your home. It adds character. It adds a bit of love, in my opinion, to your home, to those that come through your door. There's nothing like the smell of good food baking, or a loaf of bread hot out of the oven. I mean, those are values that give a home its character that you just don't get in other ways. Take the time to learn how to cook and expand on those things. After you've got a few basics down, you can move on to like the bread and the cornbread and how to make fluffy, wonderful biscuits, and take pride in what you cook as a sign of love and service to your family, to your husband, and part of what makes being a homemaker a joy. If we hire everything out, then we lose some of the very intricate things in life that bring the joy to what we do as homemakers. All right, guys. So I think that pretty much wraps up my cooking from scratch homemaking skills. Remember, if you have a homemaking skill that you would like to add to my list as I go through this, or just ideas, please list it below in the comments and let me know. If you're a seasoned homemaker and you want to add something that you think is tremendously valuable, please let me know. I would like to do that. I plan to continue on with the series of basic, most important homemaking skills. So, okay, I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.